Arden Labs, specializing in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, and development. Module 12, Testing. You are now watching Lesson 12.4, Testing Internal Endpoints.
A lot of times what you're going to really be doing in Go, at least what I do a lot in Go, is I build endpoints, right? We're building web services, web APIs. And when you're doing that, you want to be able to test those endpoints as well from the MUX, right? From the routing down and bypassing all that networking. The last thing you want to do is stand up your own server to test it. And again, the HTTP package gives us the ability to actually test our endpoints right there in our unit test without having to stand up a server. So let's see how all that works. Now, in order to show you this, one of the things I've done here is we're going to set up a real basic server like this is a web application. So I'm going to use that listen and serve, and we're going to listen on port 4000. But we've got to bind some routes. So I decided to create a separate package called handlers to do that. So let's take a look at our handlers code. So under handlers there, we've got a handlers.go file. And what we've done is we're going to use the HTTP default MUX there. And we're going to, in the routes function, add a route called send.json, where anytime we hit the send.json route, we're going to call this send.json function. I want you to get a look at the send.json function. There it is. We're going to just kind of mock a response there by using a literal struct. We're going to initialize it. And then we're going to send the content type, the header, and then we're going to send that back down under JSON. So let's just take a look to see if this is even working. What I'm going to end up doing is coming back into our code here. We're going to build this example. We're going to run it. And we're listening on 4000. So let's go ahead here and get to 4000. And we said that was send JSON, right? Send JSON. So we should be able to do that. There it is. We're hitting this local server now that we're running. Beautiful. Okay, so we know it's working. And now we're at a point where we want to test this route without me having to do everything that I just did, which was to start this server and bring it up. So what we're going to do is what we've done so far. We're going to add that underscore test file, handlers underscore test. Here it is. And we're going to add a unit test. Now, when we're going to be testing these routes, it's really important that you bind the routes to your MUX. I can't tell you how many times I've made that mistake. And it's one of the reasons why, even in this example, I've taken the routes and I've put it into a separate package. So we can call this routes function under a init and make sure that that send JSON route is bound into the test before we test it. But let's take a look at our send JSON function, our test send JSON function. Again, it's taking a testing T. We're saying that the URL is this local, right, URL send JSON, and we expect to get a 200. So given the need to test our endpoint, how are we going to do this? Well, look at what I'm doing here. In the HTTP test package, we have this new request right there, and this new request function actually returns a concrete pointer to that request value that we need to do any sort of request. So we're saying that we're going to do a get call. We're going to use that URL. There's no post data. Give me my request. Now, we now need a concrete type that knows how to be that recorder, right? That response writer. So we're going to call new recorder, and that's going to return a pointer to the response recorder type, which actually implements the response writer interface. And this is the beautiful part about what we're doing here. Now that I got a request on line 32 and I got a recorder on line 33 that implements the response writer interface, I can pass these two values directly into the MUX itself. Serve HTTP is how we process requests. So I'm bypassing the network. I'm telling the MUX, take this request, write to this recorder, right, for your response writer. And then what we can do is look at the recorder to see how well we did processing this request from the MUX down. So we're going to be doing all of that. We're going to validate that we've got that 200. We can check the recorder. And then we can also do some decoding and validate that we have the right name and email. So watch what we can do here. We're going to move into that handlers folder. Again, I can say go test hey, run, what did we name this test? Let's double check it. Run that send JSON, right? So run send JSON, and let's get that verbose output. Boom. So we're now running the send JSON test. We can see everything's successful. We can see that it ran in 15 milliseconds. All really pretty cool stuff, right? All cool stuff here. Okay, great. Now, one of the things that I want to show you here also, as it relates to this handler, is you might have seen in the tree, you might have seen in the source tree that I have this handlers example underscore test. So what you're going to see here is that Go has another type of test that we can run. They're called example tests. And what's nice about example tests is not only does this become an example inside Go doc, the documentation for Go, it also now acts like a test based on the standard out. So whatever this test outputs. So let me show that. Now, one thing here, if you want this example to not just be a test, but also show up in Go documentation, then what we're going to do is define this example function. Notice it's not a test function anymore. It's an example function. Also notice it does not take a testing T, doesn't take anything. But after the word example, what you're going to want to do is make sure you're binding it to something that is truly exported from the API. If you don't bind it to something that's truly exported from the API, it won't show up in the Go documentation. In this case, it will. And now also we can run it as a test. So let's look at what we're going to do here. In this example test, we're going to use our request and a recorder again, and we're going to run everything through the MUX. But this time, after we run this request through the MUX, we're going to take the response body, the JSON that we expected to get back, and we're going to decode it, and then I'm going to display it or write it to standard out. All right. Remember, example tests are about testing what's coming out of standard out. So literally now there's a comment here in line 33 and 34. And what this comment is saying to the example test is, this is the expected output that I expect to get when this example finishes running. So watch what we're going to do here. We're going to come back in here, and this time I'm going to say Go test, but just run the example test. Give me the verbose output. And you can see that it passed because that JSON is the expected output. Let's make an edit to this JSON so the test fails. So now we're expecting the JSON to look like this without the closing curly bracket. And boom, now it says that it failed. And it's saying, hey, you know what? We got this output, but we were expecting this output. I love examples because, again, it feeds into the idea that you can have examples in your documentation. And not only examples in your documentation, but examples that are actually compiling and running, which means that people can, copy and paste that example code, and you know for sure that it's code that will run for those people that are reading your documentation. And you get this extra special type of test that's based on output. So here we are. We ran two different types of tests that can validate that our endpoints are working from the mock, from the MUX, from that router down. I showed you how to write that basic unit test here again. The same thing that we've been doing, given when should. And I've shown you how to do that also with an example.